Hey guys, so it's been a little while since my last tier list. We had a weapon update, so with that update comes my update to my exotic weapon tier list. I will preface this video by saying that you shouldn't expect any dramatic changes from the previous list. Much like the last time, we'll start with auto rifles. Even though on a technical level auto rifles were buffed, they don't receive any significant changes. Suros, Monte Carlo, Zalo, and Fabian Strategy all pretty much retain the same ranks compared to when I did the tier list the last time, despite the changes in the PvP meta. The PvE meta basically has not changed whatsoever, meaning the weapons stay the same there as well. Hardlight is a new addition to the auto rifle category, but it doesn't place very high. In PvE, it's getting about a C+, and in PvP, about a B, very similar to Monte Carlo, even though I think Monte Carlo is a better weapon overall. The ricochet rounds mean basically nothing, and while no damage falloff is pretty nice, for PvE, it's not as nice as one might think. In PvP, it can have its moments, but the recoil can be difficult to control from farther ranges, although higher rate of fire auto rifles absolutely melt things up close. If you're good with your positioning, Hardlight can be very lethal when landing all shots consecutively. Pulse rifles all got hit a little bit via damage, and that globally brings them all down in terms of quality. Things like Red Death have declined in popularity over the past couple of months, even if their performance for the average kill is very similar compared to what it used to be able to do. In PvE, I think all of the exotic pulse rifles stay the same for the most part. Their damage output hasn't been affected too terribly to the point where I feel like it's a very different experience or that I would want to use something else. In PvP, for the most part, I think we could keep everything at almost the same place, but I also feel like we can knock everything down half a peg as well. I don't consider Red Death to be that S-tier quality weapon anymore, same with Bad Juju, but they are still excellent PvP weapons. Those mid-rate of fire pulses have kind of been falling out of the meta just slightly, but something like No Time to Explain was never a super high tier weapon to begin with. Hand cannons got a buff in a rather big way, unless you're Hawkmoon. Even Thorn of all weapons has returned in full force, but we won't be talking about Thorn today. Hawkmoon was preemptively nerfed to stop its supposed domination during testing and has been a bit difficult to succeed with. It'll go down half a step until it gains some of its power back. The last word is more annoying than ever in PvP, bringing that old B+ to A rating up to an A+, and possibly even an S tier rating depending on what kind of player you are. The only reason I'm wary about giving it an S rating is because it's definitely not as dominant as it was in year 1. The first curse got a rather nice buff, so I'm more than willing to bring that C up to a B at the least, maybe even a B+ if I'm feeling generous, although that's a PvE ranking. PvP, I personally don't think it gets a huge step up, but if you wanted to argue for maybe half a step, I would give it to you. The Ace of Spades remains untouched in ranking. Scout rifles are seeing a lot more use now, especially with the Mida multi-tool coming to year 2. The Mida multi-tool is going to get an A to A+ in PvE and an A+ or probably even an S tier in PvP. If you wanted to say that it gets an S tier in PvP, I would be totally fine with that. Even though Mida is on the lower end of the damage spectrum, it can still kill most PvE mid and low tier enemies in 1 to 2 headshots, and even though other normal scout rifles can also do that, Mida can do it faster and with slightly more ammo in the chamber. It is a very reliable weapon for PvE purposes. With pulse rifles getting nerfed, that led the way to the scout rifle's triumphant return, and Mida is very solid at nearly all ranges. It is very difficult to be at a range where you notice damage falloff. The Jade Rabbit has been a personal favorite of mine recently for PvP. It essentially needs a shotgun in order for you to stay versatile, but it covers medium and long ranges incredibly well, killing with 3 shots to the head or even a body shot and 2 headshots thanks to the damage stacking bonus, although that's not something you should rely on for something like 100 damage crits or anything like that. For me, it gets a bump up to a low A in its PvP rating, although PvE, it stays the same. Scout rifles were completely unaffected in the last patch, it's just that other things that had taken their place were nerfed, allowing scout rifles to shine a little bit more in PvP. Everything else remains unchanged. Moving to special weapons now, fusion rifles actually got nerfed, which is hard to believe considering how little people used them to begin with. Plan C, a former high tier weapon from year 1, is back for year 2, but it is well, not really that great. All fusion rifles fired from the hip now have wild recoil, and one of the strengths of Plan C was swapping to it and instantly melting someone without having to aim, provided that they were close enough. Now it's a lot harder to do that. In PvE, fusions continue to be basically ignored in most forms of play, barring any Nightfall strikes with burns. Telesto gets a slight decrease in quality, but I don't think it's enough to really move it around too much. Sniper rifles remain unchanged entirely. No Land Beyond has come into the picture, but it was never really a PvE beast. In PvP, it gets a slightly higher rating than I used to give it credit for because it did receive some buffs. It is still difficult to use well for the average player though. Shotguns were nerfed across the board and very heavily at that. However, I almost feel like they still perform the same. It's just that shotguns like the Conspiracy Theory D from the Quest were nerfed to be not so ridiculous. The way that people use Invective and Fourth Horseman, which is basically just run up to person and spray them with damage, doesn't really seem to have changed. I don't really feel like that experience is different at all. The Chaperone also feels mostly the same. In PvE, I think they all stay untouched, but if we wanted to drag them down a half step in PvP, I think that would be fine. Finally, all heavy weapons remain unchanged. No heavy weapon was affected by any sort of buff or nerf since we last reviewed them, so no changes need to be made. Super Good Advice and Dragon's Breath were added to the mix in the December patch though, but I don't think either of them are drastic game changers in the heavy slot. They're fun options, and overall they're very solid options, but you can very easily live without them if you don't have them or you don't want to spend the money on them. That is your updated weapon tier list. Like I said, there wasn't too much movement overall. The weapon buffs and nerfs from December were only very slight with regards to shifting year 2 exotic weapons around in the tier list. As usual, when another update rolls around, if need be, the tier list will be updated as well. That'll do it for me, guys. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.